that. And I think we should now be recording the session. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Frank and ask him if he would take us forward into the next part of all of this. And I'll just make this into. There we go. Frank, over to you. There we go. And I think when you start speaking, you'll come up on the picture, right?
Okay, well, the reason I'm here this evening is on the slide now. In my wanderings through second-hand booksellers' catalogues, I saw this copy of What to See in a Country Church. And the name Lawrence Jones immediately leapt out to me, and particularly what was particularly interesting from the book, which I might otherwise have, was the bookseller's note that was the dedication to Martin Cecil. That name also leapt out to me because of my interest in this church, and so I acquired it, and I wrote to Bob Luke saying I'd like to present this book to the parish and return it whence it came 60 years ago.
And thank you very much indeed for doing so. There we are.
I'm not sure that's a hugely notable addition to the church's library, but it does seem to have come home. And I was perhaps foolish enough to say to Father Luke that I'd taken an interest in this church, it must be now 15 years ago, when I was spending 2 days a week in the vestry hall in the church entry, acting as caseworker at the Ancient Monuments Society. And during that time, I was also chairman of the London Society, and I was investigating the bequest which Bannister Fletcher had given to the London Society, finding out a little bit more about him and his family and the reasons for the bequest. And Martin, sacristan here, said, "Oh, we've got a drawing by Bannister Fletcher." A drawing I had never seen before, and I suspect not many other architectural historians had ever seen before, because it had been on the wall here, I think, for many years. And this was an extremely interesting proposal for rebuilding this church after the bomb damage in 1940. And I then wrote up a little note of that for the London Society. I foolishly sent a copy of that to Father Luke when I wrote to him about the book, and hence I've been dragooned into coming here this evening, which I have to say, it's always a pleasure to be in this church, which obviously, because I've worked very close to it and used the library, which is in the gallery up there, reasonably frequently. It's a building I know quite well. Next one. So now this book has come home. And so the title was effective to talk a little bit about Lawrence Jones, the church warden of this church for many years, Bannister Fletcher, the architect whose scheme is now on the screen, but whose scheme was not in the end executed, Marshall Sisson, the architect whose scheme was eventually executed, and Ivor Bulmer Thomas, one might say the screws behind all these things. Anyway, this is the drawing which Bannister Fletcher produced. The original is now on display in the church. Martin's put it up for this evening's meeting. I'm afraid those of you online won't be able to see it, but those who are here will have a look. It's now at the back of the church. And it's a coloured drawing, but this photograph was taken years ago in black and white, and therefore the reproduction is in black and white. I'll come back to this perhaps in due course. I'm not sure whether if necessary we can come back to this slide, because I want to talk first of all about how we looked at it and about Bannister Fletcher. The only thing I would like to comment on, which I hadn't noticed earlier on, is that you can see the chapel at the south side is actually called King Charles's Chapel, which I think is a good indication of the clerical tendencies of St Andrews. The next one. Bannister Fletcher came to do this design very quickly after because he was long associated with the church. Bannister Fletcher was a well-known architect, and I'll just say a little bit about that in a minute or two. But the first collection we had with actually doing any works to the church were the works on the south side facing Queen Victoria Street. This is the drawing from the published works of Bannister Fletcher, and again, I think Martin has a copy to hand from the church library, showing the scheme which Bannister Fletcher had prepared as a memorial to his father. It's a little bit difficult. At the bottom it says Bannister Fletcher and Sons Architects. Professor Bannister Fletcher, the father, set up practice in New Bridge Street in the 1880s, and the practice remained in the area until Bannister Fletcher's death in 1953, having been bombed out of New Bridge. They left New Bridge Street in the 1920s, moved into in a temple, and they were bombed out of that. And so for the best part of 70 years, Bannister Fletcher and Sons practice with a local practice. And Bannister Fletcher became the church warden of this church and of the joint parishes of the town. St Andrews. We'll go to the next one. And that scheme, which you saw there, but not implemented exactly as before, but nevertheless, the gate appeared everywhere. And that, as you probably know, was a memorial to the father, Professor Bannister Fletcher, by his son, Sir, who became Sir Bannister Fletcher. And on to the next one. This is the parish hall which Bannister Fletcher Jr. designed. Put the interior up. For the 12 years that I was at the Ancient Monument Society, 2 days of work, I was working at a desk about 4 feet away from the plate over the chimney piece, which says Bannister Fletcher Church Wall. It's a very fine little classical building, and in fact, the only listed building by Bannister Fletcher in London. And after bombing, within 2 days, that building had been fitted out as the place for holding church services. And I think church services continued in there until 1961. And the eagle-eyed of you will have noticed that Bannister Fletcher was not a modest man. He left his signature on most of his buildings, and you can see rather flaky there on the left is the inscription on the memorial gates facing Queen Victoria Street, and on the right down at the right-hand side by the base of the columns at the front of the vestry wall is his signature in stone. I'm sure it's not terribly clear, but there, the eagle eye, yes, it is there. It is there. Next one, I think we can actually see the two Bannister Fletchers. They were both political animals. Professor Bannister Fletcher was an MP for some years. He died in 1899. The sons took it over. And the second son, who was a part of practice was killed in the First World War. He was the oldest flying member of what was the beginnings of the Royal Air Force. But the practice continued as Bannister Fletcher and Sons for years. And in fact, it was only the younger Bannister Fletcher who became Sir Bannister Fletcher, who was running the practice. And he became Sir not because of his architecture, but because he was the sheriff of the City of London, who was knighted for his services to civic life. And he took a very active part in many architectural activities. Died very rich and childless, and hence his substantial endowments of things which still carry his name, like the library in the Royal Architects, Bannister Fletcher Library. The other half of his fortune going to the University of London to promote education. One of the most extraordinary things I found about him was when I looked up the will, as I was checking his request to the London Society, was that although Bannister Fletcher had no children, his will referred to his brother Hugh Undecimus Fletcher and another brother called Ernest Tertius Decimus Fletcher. A census record shows a DD Fletcher, which I think is a duodecimous Fletcher. And when I reported this to a friend who was in the London Society, he said, "Oh, I knew Percy No Fletcher." So although he had no children, he had many siblings. The fortune came largely from publication rather than architectural work. Next slide. In later years, by Mr. Fletcher, we skipped one. No, okay, never mind. This is in later years, by Mr. Fletcher moved with the times. This is his only listed building outside the city in Greater London. That's Gillette Factory out in West London. But most of the money came from publications. The professor, the farmer, had started enormous numbers of practical guidebooks, things like dilapidations and valuations, and all those useful things to architects. And the Sun kept them in print, kept them renewing the editions, keeping them up to date for years and years and years. I've got a copy of Mr. Fletcher's Constance on my shelves at home, which I use occasionally just to look up whether something was even practical a particular day. But what he is best known for is the history of architecture and the comparative method, first published just before the professor's death, but kept going, and now I think in its 21st or 22nd edition online, not hardback. I think the 20th edition was the last hardback copy. But almost all architects, architectural students, the first history book they get is by Mr. Fletcher's History of Architecture and the Comparative Method. And I think that is the source of his substantial fortune. The next one. The next name on my list was Lawrence Jones. And he was more of a mystery to architectural historians. By Mr. Fletcher's name is well known. But until all this started, I hadn't really heard of Lawrence Jones. Here is Lawrence on the left, and a writer, as you saw on the first slide of the book, which I've just given to the church. He also wrote The Observer of the Old English Churches, and another book called The Beauty of English Churches. He was a solicitor in the city in Coleman Street. And I don't know where this interest in churches came from. It came, I think, from an early date. And he obviously responded to the air raid of 1940 very rapidly in realizing that something needed to be done. Next slide, which is something I found when trying to find a bit more about Lawrence Jones, which I had not known before. Was the organisation that we now know as the Friends of City Churches actually started off with a different name, which is actually the City Churches Society. And I found a bit of fire in the City Churches Society, which is very much. I'll just be able to pick it out on the screen. But this was founded, I think, in 1941 by Lawrence Jones. We are on treasurer, Mr. Lawrence Jones, but perhaps significantly, one of the patrons is by Mr. Fletcher. So it's beginning to see this little network of people who are all involved in the rebuilding of St. Andrews, beginning to get together. And this is the flyer that was issued for this new City Churches Society. Asking people to join up and also saying what perhaps they might do to benefit the city churches. And we'll go on to the next one. Within a very short time, Marshall Sisson was brought in. First I know of his contact with St. Andrews is in July 1947, when he'd been briefed to do a report on city churches, on St. Andrews. And you see on the right, there's a letter from Lawrence Jones to the Friends of the City Church, on the headed paper by that time, the Friends of the City Churches, forwarding to the Committee of the City Churches Marshall Sisson's surveys on other churches, not St. Andrews in this case, but St. Swithin, St. Nicholas Co Abbey, and St. Alban Wood Street. So by this time, Lawrence Jones had managed to get Marshall Systems, at least, as well as Barrister Fletcher, involved in proposals for reconstructing the city churches in the next one. Oh, this slipped a little bit. These are two. Sorry, I thought I put Barrister Fletcher things. These are Marshall Systems, and Marshall Systems is a character. There's a large archive at the RIBA which I haven't explored. He's got very few listed buildings. The one on the left is a building called Bell Rock House in Cornwall, designed by Marshall Systems very much in modern style of the 1930s. And it's characteristic of historic England's listing procedures now. There's an architect like Marshall Systems to get himself listed for something like that, rather than many other things that he did. But on the right, it's also fair to say that perhaps in the 1930s he had a tarnished reputation. When I first mentioned Marshall Systems to one of my architectural historian colleagues, they shrugged their shoulders and replied with a single word: black shirt. And one of the files which I haven't looked at, which is in the RIBA catalogue lists it as National Union Fascists. So also, Marshall Systems was not, I think, didn't keep particularly good company, at least in the mid-1930s, but seems to have had something of a revolution perhaps in the late 1930s, when he saw which way things were going. And certainly during the war, he began to work extensively, particularly with the Society of Protection of Ancient Buildings, on surveying and reporting on historic buildings. And when the government set up the first listing of historic buildings in the 1944 Act, Marshall Systems was the Society of Protection of Ancient Buildings representative on what was called the McLagan Committee, which started the listing of historic buildings. So Eric McLagan, retired director of the Victorian Museum, was also on the City Churches Committee. There's a little network there that needs exploring. But Marshall Systems' most best known restoration, apart from this church, is the restoration of St John Smith Square, which is now, of course, a very fine concert hall. A person who can't quite work out how to understand it, but certainly at one time he was a member of the PCC, is Sir Albert Richardson. And Systems was Richardson's pupil. And some people say that it was Richardson who got Systems the job of designing St Andrews, the repairs and renewal of St Andrews. I'm not sure that's right, because all the evidence that I've seen suggests that Systems had contact with this church, and particularly with Lawrence Jones, before Richardson came on the scene. But Richardson was a significant figure, rebuilding things in the city like Trinity House, and designing new buildings in what was, I suppose, one would describe as progressive classical style, such as, very close to here, Bracken House in the 1950s. Again, I have no idea why Richardson suddenly find himself on the committee, on the PCC of this church. But again, it's part of this very interesting architectural network which was building up at a very early date around this church. And then the last person, whose name wasn't on the title of my talk, but who man behind the scenes from a very early date, is Ivor Gordon Thomas. I'm not quite sure when he first became a member of the PCC in Church Ward, but it was at quite an early date. And I'm pretty sure why Ivor would have taken an interest in this church is because of the Bishop's Commission, which was proposing initially not to rebuild this church wall, but to sell the site after bomb damage. But Ivor hated that idea and immediately came to the parish offering his support for other proposals. And he was a committed churchman, but also a thorn in the flesh of much of the church bureaucracy. He was was a member. He was of the in 1954, I think it was. The Church of England agreed to set up what became the Historic Churches Preservation Trust, which was a fund partly from the Church of England, which would give money towards the repairing of historic churches. And Ivor Thomas then had an enormous falling out with Geoffrey Fisher, the Archbishop of Canterbury, because he and the Churches Committee said that they were not going to use any of that money except for churches which were in current use. And Ivor saw that as a threat to many churches. Indeed, as St Andrews was in that state, a church which was not in use. And he wanted money to be available for what he described as friendless churches, and then set up the Friends of Friendless Churches in 1957. He effectively was the friend of friendless churches until his death. That's the report of the Times in 1957, when the Friends were set up. And the significance is now the formation of the Friends was announced last night. Mr. Ivor Thomas and Mr. Lawrence Jones of Cullen Street. By that time, I think Ivor and Lawrence were hand in glove with many schemes for protection of historic churches. And of course, a few years on, Friends formed eventually the Bridges Commission, set up or produced a report which led to the formation of the Redundant Churches Fund, which is now the Churches Conservation Trust. Was it perhaps further down on this? We're pointing out further on Mr. Thomas, chairman, secretary, the Office of Society, included Sir Albert Richardson as president. And right at the bottom, Mr. John Betchman, editor. I'm not quite sure if Mr. Betchman edited for the Friends of Friendless Churches, but nevertheless, he was taking an interest as well at that time. Next one. This is slightly back from March's system. The church was eventually rebuilt, as you all know, after being threatened, largely because of the pressure which Lawrence Jones and Ivor Thomas exerted on the church authorities. Succeeded in fundraising. Can we go back to that second? Is it possible to go right back to the second one? The scheme which Bannister Fletcher produced was produced, at least in this one, was produced with some cooperation with the British Foreign Bible Society, our premises next door. And it included a proposal that in fact the church should be floored over as effectively gallery level, leaving the space that we are in now as a sort of church assembly hall, with the church itself upstairs. And the interesting, what happened during the 15 years effectively after the reform was a tension between this scheme and the scheme more or less on the lines we have now, restoring it as, if not a Wren church, as recognisably in the Wren tradition. And it's clear that when Francis Fletcher produced this scheme, almost from the beginning, Lawrence Jones was opposed to that, and Ivor Thomas came on board for that. But interestingly, soon after I'd first taken an interest in this, I sent a copy of what I'd written for the London Society on this, and I got a letter from Peter Foster, who was the successor to Marshall Sisson's practice, who'd been delving in his archives, and I hadn't realised, I thought that the church, what I described as the church hall scheme, with the hall underneath and the church on top, was still around really quite late into, this letter is 1955, and it says, "We must remember that this church is a parish church, and that it will have a great future, and nothing should be done in its rebuilding that would in any way distract from its full use for that purpose. My own personal opinion is that any scheme put forward by the Bible Society will need to be most carefully considered. And I think that I should oppose any scheme that the church should be in the upper part of the building, which would necessitate further stairs. The diocesan authorities will have their say. And that's a letter from to Marshall System as late as 1955. So it's clear that this tension between how to rebuild St Andrews, between what we describe as the hall, the church hall underneath and the church above, and the form that we have now, have been going for probably the best part of 15 years before we actually reached the position we have now, in which the church is built in its present form. We go back to where we were before. Just one further, and I'll end with that. That is though when Marshall System became a member of the Royal Academy, you should probably know if you're elected to the Royal Academy, you have to present a work to one of your works to the Royal Academy. Artists, of course, can give them a picture. It's a bit difficult for architects to give them a building. So the tradition is that an architect submits a drawing to the Royal Academy of one of his works. And it's perhaps significant that Marshall System, when he was elected to the Royal Academy, gave the drawing of St Andrew by the Wardrobe as the work which he obviously felt most strongly about. With that, then I'll leave you to progress to the future.
Well, thank you so much, Frank, for your knowledgeable and full explanation of how we've got to where we are now. Thank you very much indeed. Laura, I'm going to hand straight over to you. I can see there are some questions in the chat, but we'll come over to you, and then we'll do all the questions at the end. I hope you can still hear us and see us all right on online.
So my name's Lorelei. I am the Parish Administrator here at St Andrew by the Wardrobe. And when we were putting together the idea for this evening, we thought it might be nice just to have a short bridge, a voice to talk about what it's like being in the building now after the previous refurbishment and just before we start on what we're calling the future one. And when Father Luke introduced me right at the beginning, he said this was going to be warts and all, and frankly, it was really just warts. But I will say I do love working here. I absolutely loved it from day one, but it does bring some challenges, and I had never worked as a church administrator before, never worked actually in a church building. So to come into a building that is so run down, if you don't mind me saying, and to be the only person literally working in the building. I came from Transport for London, which just massive open plan offices where you can barely hear yourself think. And so to come into here, it was quite different. But this is my aide memoir, Don't Blow Up the Wardrobe. So there had not been an administrator here for around 6 months before I came, and I think somebody may want to correct me, but I think there is underfloor heating in this church, which must have been extremely modern and fantastic when it was put in, but it had conked out a long time before I arrived. And the building is heated by Caligas, not really Bob. And the gas had run out and there was no administrator, so I don't know the last time even any part of the fabric of the building had been warmed up. So I was in the office, there was a Caligas heater, and I was putting that on in the morning when I was coming in, and then I'd turn it off to go out to lunch, and I'd come back from lunch and I could just smell gas in the office. So I'd sort of brave it through the afternoon and not switch it back on, because as I said to Father Luke at the time, I was like, nobody wants to be the person who blows up a 400-year-old building. It's been here over 300 years since the Christopher Wren rebuilt it, and I thought, I don't want to come in and like flick on the light switch or something and the whole thing goes kaboom. But it is cold, and it's a little bit chilly this evening, and I guess when there are a lot of people in here, you know, we kind of warm each other up. Although that's not done so much now in the times of COVID, but it will be lovely to have some heat back in here, and with that also some lighting. We've got the lights turned down now so that you can see the presentation, but this bank of lights doesn't work, and various parts of the electricity has had to be switched off to keep this building open, quite frankly. And we had a livery service come in and use the church for a service. Livery company come in and use the church for a service recently, and their chaplain and their speaker had to get ready in the sacristy in the dark. So, you know, it would be lovely to have the lights all redone as well. Toilets. Before I even thought about becoming a church administrator, I was trained to be a chartered surveyor way back in the day, and I went for a job interview at the Permere Borough High Street, and the interview was in this really plush conference room. I think they'd recently redone it. When they offered me the job, I really jumped at the chance, and then I got there on the first day, and the actual offices were quite tatty. And I went to the loo, and the loos, they were awful. I don't think they had any intention of even refurbishing them. And I said to myself, I will never take another job without using the facilities at the interview to check out exactly how well these people maintain their buildings. And I did get the full tour here from Father Luke. But yes, again, something that is sadly in need of a little tender loving care, and again so cold. So I'll sit in that office, and we finally worked out, actually, when Bob came to do the quinquennial inspection, we got told that we shouldn't really be using gas heaters, and I was told to use the electric heater in the office, and I don't know, I'm not very technical. It took a little while to work out how to get it going. So thankfully, the office actually is now both safe and, well, I say now, has up until very recently been both safe and warm. And so just to come out of that warm and to brave into what can be quite cold temperatures to go to the loo, sometimes I really have to use all my skill to kind of leave it as long as possible. It's you know, it's not good. And lone working, so I touched on that. It was quite stressful, actually. I felt very vulnerable working here. There are lots of noises. The building kind of, I don't know if it moves, but there's kind of creaking noises, and I just felt very vulnerable, because not only am I on my own in here, but it's absolutely public. Anybody can walk in off the street and walk into my office. I've never worked anywhere where you could actually kind of get into the area where I was working before either, and we put together a lone working policy, but it took me a long time to get comfortable with working here. And one time I did come in, and there was a homeless man up in the gallery, and he was calling out to me because he needed help, and I went up to attend to him, but I was told that really that's not really what I should be doing, because there could be any number of people up there kind of waiting for you. You don't know, you know, what situation you're walking into. And so although it isn't part of the reason why we're doing this refurbishment and why we're entering into a partnership with the Egyptian Coptic Orthodox Church, it would be nice, I think, to share the building and have a lot more activity here and not feel quite so vulnerable. Accessibility. We have a very imaginative, accessible entrance, which is not step-free. So anybody using a wheelchair really is going to need to have somebody with some strength to get them over. I think, I don't even know how many centimetres the step goes to actually come into the church. And then once you're in, the building isn't fully accessible. And I did a accessibility audit, and it does meet the criteria, but I think a lot of wheelchairs, for example, can actually be quite wide, wider than the legal requirements ask you to facilitate. And so I think it could be quite difficult for people to navigate into the parish room and into the toilets, for example. So accessibility is one thing, but it will be good to see improved. Again, the livery company that came and did their service recently, they asked if they could have somebody come in a wheelchair, and it just wasn't possible for a number of reasons, but that will be good to have that improved. And really, I'm just going to come back to the idea of not blowing up the wardrobe, because I was in the office the other day and I was on the phone and I just heard the most almighty bang, and then as I turned to where the sound was coming from, just a flash of electricity came out of the wall heater on the wall, and I think a light had blown outside my office, and whatever the surge of electricity may be had kind of come out through the heater. So now that's been turned off as well, and it just adds to a feeling of vulnerability and a kind of increased urgency of looking forward to when these works are done and we can be in a more modern and comfortable and warm environment. So really that's all I have to say about working now and worshipping in this building. And now I will hand over to our Surveyor and Architect, Bob Wilson and Joseph Edwards.
Laura, thank you very much. Bob and Joe.
Good evening. Hope you can see us. I just enjoyed the walk. It's the first time I got warm for just a few seconds because it is jolly cold in here. Laura is not lying. So I'm Bob Wilson. I'm a building surveyor by initial training, project manager. And my business partner here, Joseph, is an architect. And I'm going to start. I'm going to do a double act. So I will start with a few of the technical aspects and the legal aspects, the boring aspects, I guess, and then Joe gets to do the more interesting slides with the various drawings and what have you. So if we go to the next slide, please. So picking up really from where Laura left off, I wanted to say a few words about the existing situation here. Yes, it is definitely cold. The electrics, large parts of it are condemned. I think if we were to go much further, it would all end up being condemned and the church would have to be closed. It is that serious. The good news is that structurally, the building is in good condition. Yes, there are some maintenance issues and a lot of it is tired, but it's a very sound building, which with a certain amount of investment, we can actually get back to being where we want to be. So the existing situation is not great, but the building blocks that we need are there. So what are the constraints? Well, the obvious one is money. Whatever we're going to do in order to build this building back to the sort of use that we want is going to cost a lot. In addition, we've got the grade 1 listing status. That restricts very much what we might want to do. Not that we would want to have to change a great deal of this, but it certainly constricts the way we approach various things. And I'll come back to that more in a moment. And the way the church is currently fitted out with the fixed pews, of which many of you, I'm sure, are familiar, and a lot of the other spaces, there is no real scope for changing things. So when we're looking at the existing situation and perhaps the affordability of keeping a building like this going, one of the things that we try to do is look at the use of that building, because things like parish rates are on the decline generally in the city. Congregations are not at the numbers that one would really need, again, across the city in order to maintain these buildings. So trying to find a formula that keeps us going is hard. So then I come to the opportunity. I'm not sure where it originally came from, but there's an opportunity to work with a potential tenant. And it's a tenant that would like the building in the form that we currently have it. And that is rare. This is the Coptic Orthodox Diocese of London as a tenant. and they would be very happy not only to use it as their base, but to allow the building to be shared with the PCC so that your existing mission, your existing uses can continue. And that's a fantastic opportunity. It's quite rare that there is that commonality of use for a building of this type. So from that, we've been working with both the prospective tenant and the PCC to develop a brief. Top of the list is new electrics and lighting, because really without doing that, we can't open the building. So that's got to be there. I wrote new heating. Actually, heating would just be fine. I'm going to keep moving. It's not because I'm I'm just cold. Accessibility. We've already heard that it's an imaginative solution at the moment. I think we do need to bring it into the 21st century and improve that. Those of you who are familiar with the toilets will recognise Laura's descriptions earlier. And I think the survey, or the kitchenette as it currently stands, that's probably going to also need upgrading somewhat, not only for the PCC's use, but also for the tenant's use. So a thermal upgrade of the building, I think, would be appropriate, and I'll come back to that as I talk about sustainability in a few moments. And essential repairs and redecoration. Those are the things that we've been tasked with trying to address. Immediately out of that, we did some studies as to the likely budgets that would be needed in order to achieve such a brief. And even paring it back to the minimum we possibly could, the scheme is in excess of £1 million. It's a very significant challenge, and one that with our fundraising team, we're working very hard and very successfully at making good inroads to actually getting this going. And I'll come back to, I'll come to that now. To do it all in one hit was going to be perhaps too challenging. It's just too great a challenge to raise £1 million plus. But because there are things that we can do here in a phased approach, we can actually deliver a usable building. It might not be beautiful, it would be warm, it would be safe, it would be health and safety compliant. It might not have the loos done yet, it might not have a proper kitchen yet, but it would be at a state that the tenant could take possession and then work together with the PCC at finishing off the project. And by phasing it in that way, we hopefully, as you would, been able to put together a set of proposals that allow the project to start. And we're very much hoping that we'll be able to get contractors in place for the first phase just before Christmas. Let's go to the next slide, please. A quick canter through the team, really. The PCC is our focal point. That's where our instructions come, and they're a significant partner in the development of what we're doing. Edwards Wilson, that's our company. We're acting as architects and project managers. Eng Design, our services consultants, they have an awful lot of experience of working with church groups, are based locally, so that's very Next in the Navarro Pledge are structural engineers. We don't have a great deal of input from that side of things, but there are some key aspects which I'll come back to later. Light Perceptions, Bruce Kirk is the gentleman who runs that practice, and he has done many very, very fine schemes throughout many churches, and including in the city, and I think we're very lucky to have his input on this church. Stace are quantity surveyors to keep us in control from an expenditure point of view. And then we have a wonderful fundraising team, part of which are here tonight and part I think are on Zoom. So Tessa and Carol, thank you very much for all your inputs. So the concept. First of all, use. And there's another slide which I'll ask you to take us on to, and then I'll come back on it. And I've got a question for everybody who's there, because this slide in truth has got pink and orange on it. And I can see the pink and orange on the screen, but I can't see it here. What do people at home have, as it were? Can you see colour? see the response. Can you see the response?
Yes,
You can see the colour.
Yeah.
Thanks,
You can see the
Tessa.
colour.
That's fantastic.
Excellent. Okay, well, that saves me doing a lot of pointing. Thank you.
Talking into the microphone.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So the pink areas are those parts of the building that we will give responsibility to the tenant to look after, to maintain, to pay the utility bills, or all of the running of the building. As you can see, that's the vast majority of the building footprint. The large white space in the bottom left corner is obviously the upper part of the nave. So it's not that it's been forgotten, it's just it's not there on that particular floor plate. The small orange areas, which I think we're going to try and point out with you, are the bits that will be exclusive to the PCC. Not very much, and that's deliberate because, in a sense, we're looking to minimise the costs to the PCC of running the building. The benefit is that very large parts of that pink area will be usable by the PCC. So, in terms of use, what we've tried to do is come up with a scheme that allows the PCC and its other users to access the building and use it in very much the way that you do now and the way you perhaps have in your mission plan to move forward. But at the same time, transfer the management responsibilities on a day-to-day basis and the repairing liabilities to the tenant. And that's what this proposal does. I think that brings me on to the legal side of it. So that's, if I can go back one slide now. Those of you who can't see it at home, but Father Luke is actually on the floor trying to gauge us through here. So thank you very much. Legal matters. Clearly, this agreement will involve legal documentation, and the way that's being put together is through a series of licenses that are interlinked. And what will happen is that the tenant will be responsible for all of those pink areas on the plan, and the PCC just the orange. And the way that it's functioning at the moment is that all of the utility bills will be paid by the tenant. The building insurance will be paid by the PCC, and the PCC will receive a license fee, a rent, if you like, for the full 20-year term of the building. The initial 10 years or so of that term, we'll be discounting the license fee a little bit because we've managed to negotiate with the tenant that they will help put some capital up front before they even take occupation to enable us to get to our fundraising targets for the first phase. And in fact, we're almost there on that. So in legal terms, that's very much in process, and we're almost close to crossing the line there. Sustainability. I haven't got a boring slide for this one, I'm just going to talk. Many of you, I'm sure, will be aware of the Church of England commitment to net zero carbon 2030. We're trying very hard across all of the churches throughout the country, and that is a very significant challenge. I think even in if I may say, an ordinary church, it's going to be a challenge. But for a grade 1 listed church, that's hard. And for a grade 1 listed church in an urban setting, that's even harder. And it's going to be, I think, very, very difficult for that target to be met. I think we'll make good inroads to it generally. But what we're trying to do here is actually meet that target. And the plan we have should enable us to do that. When we're looking at carbon, one of the biggest hurdles or challenges that we face is the heating element of costs and carbon generation. On an average church, the carbon footprint that it uses is 72% of that is about heating. So clearly, if we can do something about the way that part of the building works, we're going to be well down the road to success. And the first thing that we do normally, and we are doing it here, is to improve the thermal efficiency of the building. That said, we can't do that in a lot of instances. The windows, for example, we can't put double glazing in. That's not a starter. The walls and we can't really do anything with that. In short, the one thing we really can do is in the roof space. So we're putting in a good deal of insulation into the roof space. That stops us losing the precious heat that we hope one day to have. And it also, of course, makes our target for putting heat in rather lower. So that has a beneficial effect. So what can we do on heating? Well, gas and oil are pretty much non-starters in terms of the fossil fuel elements for that. That's not going to get us anywhere near where we need to be. Biomass boilers also not really going to be viable here for a number of reasons, spatial capacity, and we've got the renewable aspect of that. It's not going to make the footprint in terms of carbon neutrality. Electricity, yes, we can move towards electricity, and in part we are doing. I'll come back to that in a moment. But again, we need to be using the green tariffs as a supplier, not some of the others. Branch source heat pumps, very, very expensive, so perhaps ruled out from that point alone. But they come in two forms: a horizontal array, we would need a big open space for that, and we're Grade 1 is a church in an urban setting with hardly any open space, so that's not going to work. Vertical bores, that's where the heating pipes go right down very deep. Again, we don't really have too much space on the outside to put them, because we hardly have any space at all on the north and just a little on the south, and we can't really go through the floor here. So, and there are not many churches in the country that have got that sort of technology at the moment. There are, I think, two in London. St Paul's Cathedral has a little bit of that, and I think St Martin in the Fields has a bit of that, but their use profiles, I think, give them a rather stronger financial foundation to move forward than we have here. So really, that leaves us with air source heat pumps. And the difficulty normally with that is that they involve a lot of external plant. It's noisy sometimes, and it's certainly not beautiful. And there's no way we will be able to put that on our building. Here, however, we do have a very large roof space, and Joseph will show some images of this later. But by treating some of that roof void as external space, in inverted commas, we're able to put the plant within the roof. It's completely invisible. We've got measures to deal with noise and vibration. And it means that we are able to pursue that as a very green and carbon neutral technology. Solar panels could be used to augment that. We couldn't use them to generate all of the energy that we need. We just don't have a big enough roof for that. It could be used to top up, but I think the way the scheme has been developed, the air source heat pumps in combination with green tariff electricity will actually deliver us the ambition for carbon neutrality for 2030. And that would be a very significant milestone. It's very exciting for us. So that's our approach. And before I hand over to Joseph, perhaps a word a little bit about the scheme. The building and our approach to dealing with the building is conservation based. We've heard a great deal of the history of how the building has got to how it is now. But that produces a number of key challenges. There are some things in this building that will be very different when this project is finished. Things like the toilets, things like hopefully it'll be warm. And the lighting scheme will be at a modern level. We'll be reusing a lot of the existing fittings, but it will be augmented with others. The kitchen will be also up to modern standards. But almost the success, or the key to our success of the rest of it, is that you won't be able to see what we've done. A lot of the heating equipment and the apparatus and how we get the heat out into the space. If you can see all of that in any significant way, then we haven't succeeded. So it's a balance of achieving modern facilities within this setting, but also respecting the heritage conservation principles behind that. I think at that point, I'm going to hand over to Joseph to bring us through the slides as to how we're going to achieve that, but look forward to taking any questions at the end.
Joseph, as you start, there's just one question that's come up in the chat, just to ask how much of the existing building is REN, and I think the answer to those is probably the walls of the tower. Is that right?
The external walls to the main part of the church and large parts of the town.
And do keep speaking up and into the microphone.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Yep. Hi everybody. You've heard the brief and the constraints from the others. So I'm going to talk you through the interventions that we've proposed to try and deliver that and get the maximum out of this scheme. So next slide. Yeah, perfect. So if everybody can see that, we have been tasked with delivering the maximum, should we say, improvements to user experience to the building, but with the minimum impact to the fabric. So there are a few interventions I'd like to talk about, and some of them we'll look at in a phase 2. So for the purpose of this, we're going to concentrate on the full rewire and the heating elements, and then a little bit later on I'll talk through the other items. So ground floor plan is on screen here, and the main thing which you hopefully won't see will be a full compliant rewire. That involves very carefully taking apart small areas of the building, taking that panel in and finding new routes through for cables and compliant services. There is the distribution of heat through the ground floor. This is achieved in a combination of ways. We have electric radiators in the main body of the nave, and we have heat emitters in the chapel and office, which are they're powered from the kit that is going up in the roof, which we'll move on to as we go through. These radiators are going to be fairly, should we say, nondescript and set back, and they will hopefully blend into the surrounding. That'll be the only thing that you really see in the nave that is a new intervention. The other sort of more significant item in here will be the rewiring, rebuilding, and relamping of all of the historical fittings. We've been working with Bruce Coates from Light Perceptions, and he's got a well, as Bob said, a proven track record with churches, not only in terms of the specification for rebuilding the light fittings, but also the augmentation of that. So we have a series of additional lights that are coming into this space. Hopefully they will be discreet, but they will improve the light levels. There are a number of fittings which are going up on the gallery, which will provide light down here, but it should really feel like the historic fittings are doing the work, and the new fittings are just sort of sitting in the background. The chapel is probably the area where we have the most intervention in terms of getting the heating in. We have to put in 2 new heat emitters there, and the idea is that we will build out the existing paneling, and that will be very much in keeping with the rhythm that's in there already. You should walk into that room and not feel like it's an intervention. And then on top of that, we have obviously the works to the toilets and kitchen and some accessibility work. We have some slides further on that will deal with those items on. Go to the next slide, please. Similar approach up on the gallery, with the heat emitters here all being powered from the roof space, with the exception of the gallery, which has a radiator. There are a number of voids which are sitting underneath the current bookcases, which we will use to distribute the services. There should be no visual impact there, but obviously the heat emitters themselves do have a visual impact on the building. They're right at the back, and certainly not on primary display. And the long-term plan is to then encase those in similar matching joinery to the bookcases. For distribution of the services from the roof, you can see at the south and west ends there are 2, I'm not sure if you can point to them, 2 risers. These distribute, yeah, that's it. These distribute the heating up and down the building, and it's, well, we considered a series of routes, but it was felt that by building out existing columns, it was going to provide us with a straightforward solution that didn't just sort of butcher the building, for want of a better word. Other than that, on the gallery, it's gonna largely stay as is. Again, we have the lighting scheme up there, which has a number of discrete fittings, which will light the soffits and pick out various items within the building. And we also have, I'm not sure if you can see, but we have there's a number of brackets which are holding banners at the moment. They will have supplementary, very small, discrete lighting on them again, which should hopefully give this area a uniform light level and just generally improve that. Next slide, please. So this is the existing roof space, and it's really going to become the engine room for this. We've looked at various options as to where we could install this kit. A few obstacles: the surrounding buildings. There's a lot of residential use here, so sound was a consideration, but also safe access. And then when we started to do the calculations on these, it was apparent that there was actually quite a large number of pieces of air handling kit which would need to go up there. So it became not viable to put them on the outside of the building. But as part of this, we sort of looked at the large volume you have up in the roof space here, and the general consensus was that it would be sufficient to install the air handling kit. So the red items that you can see on there, there's some fairly substandard access, shall we say. There's some ladders that direct you around this space at the moment. They are coming out, and the little red blob that is up on the north side of the roof there, there's an existing access hatch there which we're looking to enlarge. So those red elements are really the interventions up there, and they're nice and minimal. Next slide, please. So this is a cross-section through that space. Again, you can see the small intervention there where the roof hatch is being extended. The red in the window, there are some glazed elements in there at the moment, and there is some mesh. We will take the glazing out and install mesh throughout, but this could be used to bring the air in and out of the building, but with absolutely no real visual impact on the outside. And the orange rectangle up there is how we're going to be accessing that during the build, sort of the logistics. Yeah, sorry, we can't see it on the screen in here, but you guys at home can. Yeah, so this is where our contractors are going to be constrained to the north side. There'll be a tower up there to bring all of this kit in. Some of it is fairly substantial. It's all sort of made specifically for this project. It'll have to come in pieces and be constructed in the loft space. And we've just looked at some of the weights of the equipment today. Lots of pieces in excess of ½ a ton. So quite a few challenges there in terms of getting the kit in, getting it set up, spreading the loads, making sure that we don't have issues with vibration and sound in the main space, because obviously that would not be good. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is a proposed plan showing where the kit will be distributed. So it's not very easy to see on here, but at either end near the windows, we have essentially a piece of kit, one end which pulls air into the building and through the loft space over all of the air source heat pumps and out through the other side. So that will essentially generate a space which has the same quality of airflow as an external unit. And then we have the red rectangular sections. These are air source heat pumps. They're mounted next to the steel truss roofs sections, which partially to distribute the load, partially to help with vibration. It also allows us to put the new safety rails in there, which is the blue dashed line that you can see. There are also replacements for the ladders with proper access stairs, so this means maintenance moving forward. Bob climbing around in the roof space every few years. It's all much safer for everybody. And then the two areas with the large crosses through them, we're insulating. Well, we're actually insulating everywhere, including underneath the walkway, with a substantial amount of thermal insulation. But that's also going to work as an acoustic barrier to stop any sound coming through here. I think the last thing to mention in this space, there are 4 chandeliers, 2 in the nave and 1 over each of the stairs at the moment, and their lifting kit is all up there too. So that is going to be checked, a little bit of maintenance work to it, and then we're going to have to enclose it in an acoustic sort of a box, for want of a better word, to prevent any sound travelling through here. Can we go to the next slide, please? And this being the proposed section, so that insulation is the blue wiggly line which follows the roof there, the ceiling rather, and then you can see the new access stairs and the red interventions being the air handling kit. The air handling kit needs very little maintenance, sort of change the filters in either end, and then really it's a case of checking. It's an antifreeze product that's in them, which yeah, just needs to have a levels checked every now and again. So we're much, say, less maintenance than a large gas boiler, and a lot safer as part of that. Next slide, please. So then we have a series of phase 2, or day 2 projects, one of which is the toilets. Slightly more challenging on this one to do it without full intervention. We have a single door into a gents at the moment and a single into the ladies, and the brief calls for an accessible for both and a standard toilet for both as well. So we have introduced a second door. There's a little structural intervention in there, but that does allow us to have a fully accessible toilet on both sides, and a comfortable ambulant toilet on both sides as well. This gives us the opportunity to include a baby changing units as well. So we're really improving the facilities overall, and it will be augmented with new lighting, new heating, the same as the rest of the building. The idea is that you can sort of walk into that lobby and there'll just be some fairly nondescript doors in there. It will all feel very pared back and hopefully not jump out as a big intervention. Hopefully improve all those guys. So next slide, please. So we've been through these and just checked that everything fits with the current standards. So these are fully building regs compliant. They should last for many years, and yeah. Next one, please. Thank you. So this is the proposal for the new kitchen. It sits within the new floor plate. It's been designed as should we say, it's a servery, but with a little bit more to it. So we've got stainless steel catering grade worktops in there, but fairly standard joinery units, just simple gloss units that can be maintained easily, don't cost the earth. And there's a series of new appliances which go in there, including a couple of water boilers, decent amount of worktop space. We have sinks which will work for prep and meet the current hygiene standards, and then obviously the servery, which is accessed through the existing hatch, but that gets upgraded from a fire point of view. So you know, we've got a much safer space in there. We're also improving the ventilation in that space with new fans and extraction, and then the lighting gets brought up to speed as well. And door number 3, which is there at the bottom, that becomes a fire door. So you're greatly improving the access through there. There's a corridor right outside that room, so that sort of helps with fire safety there as well. Yeah. And this is just a small elevation of the same space. It's actually got quite a decent ceiling there when we look at this image. But we've worked through this and specified it in line with other projects we've worked on, and we know these are pretty successful. Next slide, please.
Just notice there's a wine chiller there for the rector.
Absolutely, all the essentials. So then the last piece of this puzzle is accessibility. We've looked at the constraints of the building. Anybody that's familiar with it will know we're sort of up on a plinth here. Currently, the east door to the parish room, it's almost accessible, not quite. We're looking at altering the doors on there so that they open the opposite way to their current route. And then with a little bit of pavement work outside, we can get a second level entrance there. But predominantly, we want to make sure that people can use the main entrances. So the north doors into the narthex, we're looking at regrading the paving slabs that are out there at the moment. This will allow a compliant ramp of 1 in 20, so a very shallow ramp up to the main doors. We're up here. We need to adapt the existing railings here. So the idea is to keep as much of the original fabric outside as possible, and make some minor adaptations, and then continue that with a new railing, which looks like it's always been here essentially. So whilst it's going to be a very modern approach, it should sit very comfortably against the building. We've got planning permission for that, and they were fully supportive of that, which is always a challenge with these kind of buildings. You can see the 4 planters there. They are the existing ones, and we are looking to relocate them. There's a sort of 2-pronged approach. One of them is it screens the ramp slightly, but also it prevents people from walking off the edge at the moment, which is sort of a consideration because it's about this high. And as part of the external works as well, we're looking to introduce a couple of benches there and some new lighting as well, which is consistent with the lighting which is around externally at the moment. The final little piece of the puzzle out here is the relocation of the bell, which is currently in the narthex. A few details to sort out on that, and we're working on that at the moment, but we felt it was an opportunity to present it externally where people could see it more, and it also gives us a little bit more opportunity in the narthex for any future sort of spaces that may or may not come up there. And then, yeah, there's one more slide. I'll switch to that. So this is our sections and elevations of the ramp. So you can see the green section in the middle. It's not very clear, but the green section is the existing railings which are being adapted. You can see we're raising the stone there just to create a level threshold, so once you get to the top of that ramp, just straight into the building. And we've looked at the planting in the planters as well, some of which needs replacing at the moment. So that may form part of a future part of the scheme. Next slide, please. And really, this one should have been a little bit earlier in the pack, maybe. This just identifies the historic light fittings. So the little dots there are the fittings that are throughout the ground floor at the moment. There is a few more up on the gallery as well. These are all going to be taken away, professionally cleaned, overhauled, relamps, and brought back in. So they should look like new. They should perform like modern fittings. Should all work. And the little images to the side just show where we're augmenting some of those. So the chandelier that drops down the stairs there, we're making a small modification to that. So it's got an extra section on the bottom, which should have a very simple brass fitting on it, which, you know, doesn't jump out, looks like it's always been there, but will provide a nice pool of light at the bottom that people can actually see. And then an image at the top there is just some of that augmentation on the banner holes there, which would probably be lighting me right now if they were here. I think that's it from me. Bob, you haven't been to?
Yeah, well, I think happy to take questions.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Can we just give all of our contributors a round of applause just to say a huge thank you for it. We've covered a lot of ground over the last little while, and it's cold for those of us who are here, and so on. So let's just pick up any questions that we may have in the room or in the chat, and we'll see where we end up. There's just one thing in the chat around why not just gift the whole church to the Copts, and I might just answer that is that we've got a fantastic partnership that I think will be really helpful to all of us, and there is no question of St Andrew by the Wardrobe as an Anglican church going away, not only because we have a life now, which we do, and a marvellous set of activities and things that, although small, is important. The other part of it, though, is that, as we all know, the life of the city ebbs and flows, and the city vision for 2035 shows a complete redevelopment of the south side of Queen Victoria Street, where the wonderful brutalist Castle Baynard or Baynard House building is. And unless that gets listed between now and then, there will be the most extraordinary development there, of multiple housing, retail and riverfront wonderfulness. And St Andrew by the Wardrobe will of course be poised at that point as the area around is redeveloped to be able to serve that new development as well. So we're not only doing things for the now, we're also doing things for the midterm future as well, in a way that I hope will support and partner the other churches.
I'm sorry, can I just add, it did come up in the consultation actually, a number of people were concerned that we did maintain Anglican worship here.
Absolutely, yes, yes. You're absolutely right with the remark in the chat. The Coptic Orthodox Church has had martyrs, and it's actually still up online. Bishop Angelos was very moving when I had the public conversation with him at the last Advanced Sunday School around the life of martyrdom of that church, and also challenged me back. And he said, of course, the thing is, he said that all the churches are given their crosses to bear in different ways, and he said, you have yours as we have ours, and the Lord will give you the right words at the right time, just as He has our martyrs. And I thought it was a very powerful and strong thing. So, questions or comments? We've had Frank, we've had Laura, we've had Joseph and Bob. Any other remarks or questions?
Kitchen, if I can go back to the kitchen. What sort of storage is there going to be? Uppers and lower cabinets? I only saw the lower cabinets, I didn't see the uppers.
Yeah, it was strategically placed just one way. Yeah, we have some upper units as well. So there's a series of just basic cupboards with simple shelves in them, and then the appliances generally at low level. There's a few spaces as well for storage boxes.
Will they be lockable?
Yes, that's the idea.
Anything else? I can see we're all chilling out here.
Same on the kitchen, are we really getting a cooker in there? Change from being a server into the kitchen.
In my book, yes. Apologies to Martin. I know historically it's been a very sensitive issue, but I think the use that the Coptic Church want to put the building to would require that to be able to be at the kitchen level, and certainly all the permissions that we've now got are allowing that change. So it will be upgraded in its title, as it were, from kitchenette to kitchen.
Well, that would be very useful.
That said, we're not going to be able to do big banquets or anything of that nature, but it will have.
And it's worth saying that the Coptic Orthodox young people student group, their undergraduate group, is now meeting here. I was here with 25 or 30 young people 2 or 3 weeks ago. If you look on my Twitter feed, there's some very happy photographs of us gathered around a screen with the ubiquitous Archbishop Angelos on the screen. And they all busily warmed their pizzas up as best they could before starting off. So immediately they were making that sort of use. Well, look, may I just thank everybody for your attendance this evening. Again, a huge thanks to our whole team who have given a wonderful pattern of what we've been up to. And Frank, thank you so much for the presentation of the book, which will be a marvellous addition to the library. The library is not going anywhere, and so that will continue, and so that will be a marvellous addition. And to Laura, thank you so much for not blowing us up, but also for putting up with the cold and for being so such a ray of light in the whole thing. And Bob and Joseph, thank you for keeping us safe in this time, because we are safe, but only just. And also for helping us to look forward. And we've got a little thank you here for those of you who have spoken. Thank you, Frank, very much indeed. It's extremely kind. And gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. I will make sure that Laura also gets a brief, but she doesn't know that yet. For doing. And if I may thank you enormously for joining us online. And those of you who are here, we'll throw the lights on, and if you've still got any energy and warmth left, then we'll hope to warm you in a different way. But and we will have Advanced Sunday School again, and I will make sure that the dates and things come through. Do make sure to sign up to our website, and also look on the website for the consultation, so that we get lots of responses to that then enables us to help with further fundraising. But thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. option. I need to